Welcome to the blind zone. What is the blind zone, you say? Is something that you never saw coming or is something that was right in front of your face that you refuse to see. And I'm so excited because I have today with me a new friend, Mary Beth. And again, this whole thing, the blind zone, is all providentially driven. And so I met her. Well, I'll let her explain how we met. But just during a very brief conversation, I knew that she was somebody that I wanted to invite on. So I'll introduce you to my new friend, Mary Beth.
Hello, everyone.
So, how would you describe how we met?
We met through a mutual friend. In fact, I have joined a women's group, and she had mentioned that you might, have time that we might spend together. And I was delighted. And sure enough, we set a time and we met, and we
That's
spent an
right.
afternoon together.
That's right. And I took her on many adventures. I bullied the lady at the library, and that was funny. Anyway,
And it was going to rain, remember?
so yeah, it was that. Anyway, it was a great day all the way around. But why I've invited you is because after just even a brief conversation, I realized what a curious person you were, and you're a lot like me. And not only do you think you want to know things, you actually go out to seek to find them. And then the better step of that is then you after you learn them, then you educate others because of it. And so that's really near and dear to my heart as well. And you have, we're going to hop, skip, and jump through, but you have a couple things that we're going to touch on: how you became a French teacher, your exploits in the Peace Corps, and then most recently, your yoga. But every time I talk to you, you're like, oh, yeah, I took a nutrition class or I did that. And so that's really admirable to me because I really think that people who are still curious, that we lead bigger, fuller lives than those of us who just watch television. So
Yes, it's true.
that's just my own perspective. So we're going to start back with the French because in school I had an option to take a language, and I took Spanish for a week and then I dropped it, and I have a hard enough time with English, so I knew another language wasn't going to serve me well. But how and why did you pick French, and what did you finally do with that?
Right. So originally I took French because, in fact, the teacher was the daughter of my father, who was a physician's patient. So I thought it was going to be an easy A. And so I thought I'd take it. And it turns out that she did. She was not teaching it when I finally got to the classroom. But yeah, so I took French. We lost our teacher the very first year, and which put us into an independent study situation. And my partner, independent
Mm.
study partner, was a stickler about learning and
Mm.
mastering the language. And it turns out that because of that, we went off to college together, and then we pursued traveling to France for the first time together as juniors abroad.
So when you traveled to France, I'm sure that your conquest of the language was imperative, and I'm sure you grew by leaps and bounds when you were there.
True. I mean, we'd already taken 7 years of French by the time we
Oh, okay,
were.
so you weren't novices at this point,
No,
and
but we weren't conversational by any means. And,
oh,
we it took us a couple of weeks to get used to listening and responding and, really adapting to the conversational French.
so what kind of things did you see when you were in France? The
Well, I studied in
usual,
Dijon,
okay.
so mustard and Burgundy wines and the beautiful tile roofs in Dijon. But we also took a summer. There was a month's time whereby we finished with our studies, but we hadn't gotten our grades yet. And so we took that month and we just, honestly, it was 1978, I want to say. We hitchhiked around France together. And
You never
so,
get to do that
no,
now.
not now.
A little too dangerous. So you come back and you decide what, with all this newfound skill and knowledge that you've learned because of education and just submersing yourself in that culture.
I became a French teacher, high school French teacher. And then, in fact, I pursued a graduate degree in international studies with a concentration in French foreign policy. So that took me back to France many times. And I eventually moved to France and lived there for, I want to say, a total of about 8 years.
Wow. So did you ever get to do anything with the international studies part of that fork?
Not really, because I was married and having children, so just the interest, the constant reading and the interest.
Mm-hmm,
Yes.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and because you had that previous exposure, you kind of knew what was going to happen, but there's still always more things to learn,
Oh,
especially in
absolutely.
a different country. Because, over here, we can imagine what goes on over there, but until you're over there, you really see what's truly going on.
Right.
So what happened? So you left there and then you came back here to do what?
Moved back to the United States, where my former husband was an attorney, and so lived here. And really, I was there for my children during those early years. And then post our separation, I decided, well, to be honest with you, this is an interesting story. While I was in graduate school, we had a weekend away whereby we were supposed to list 5 things that we would be doing within the next 10 years. And
Mm-hmm.
the top 2 things were join the Peace Corps and go to Africa. So I was on my own. My children had moved on. And so I applied to the Peace Corps and was immediately accepted. So I moved to Africa. So,
Yeah, most people wouldn't put that on their top two. They because I talk to a lot of Christian people and they're like, I'll do anything God wants except go to Africa, except leave my comfort in my house. And it's like, yeah, well, I think God's a little bigger than that. So what drew you to Africa? Why Africa of all places? Because if you could be a Peace Corps person anywhere, why Africa?
I think I just was always interested in what Africa was, what was there, the safaris, the beautiful nature, and then the people, the tribal feel. That was
Hmm.
interesting to me. So right, so Africa was my first choice, and I was accepted right away. So
Well, obviously you're not going over there to teach them French. So this was a really pretty significant turn down a different path for you.
right, I did teach English the first time I went. So
Okay.
the first time I went was the original Peace Corps, 27 months. I didn't stay the whole 27 months, but for a long time, at 19 months I was there. I taught English
Okay.
to young kids, and I set up a library.
Hmm.
So,
Because that was from our discussion before, you said that was in a really pretty rural place where you were the first
right,
time.
Lesotho, Southern Africa, which is a landlocked country in South Africa.
Hmm. And so, from your takeaway from that time, what would you say was the thing you learned the most about the country and about yourself during that time?
Mm, so much to learn about the country. You know, people are people and they love to love and they love to laugh and they are who they are. And when you become just part of who they are, I don't know, you laugh along with them and you love along with them. And I had many chances to dance and to want, you know, enjoy eating the foods or lack thereof, whatever there was. There were times I had no water, and you deal with it, right?
You say, and I had told you the story that when I did the mission trip to Peru, we were in the Andes Mountains, and I said, if we were anywhere in the States, one or two or all of us would have been in a truck going to Home Depot to get, the supplies we needed. But there, much like in Peru, they use what they have and they use it wisely.
Mm-hmm.
And in I applaud you greatly for going over there and folding into who they are instead of insisting they become who you are.
I think that was the joy. That's You asked me what I learned. That was the joy that I feel the strongest feeling that I have is that once I became immersed in in what they do and putting on their costumes, right, which are made from World Food Program bags.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and becoming them and trying to learn to dance like they dance, which I never was able to, but right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I still dance like I danced in the seventh grade, the pony or the swim. I'm your gal. Other than that,
Right.
not good at that. So you get over there, you do that, you teach them English, and have you ever had contact with them since you've
Oh,
been gone?
yes, once a year. I for sure. We all are assigned somebody that's called a May or somebody that's our counterpart. and I try to call them at least once a year, if not more.
Okay, and so then you make sure that the things that you incorporated in your time over there continue on in your absence because
That's
somebody else folded in after you left, folded in to continue on that work. I take it.
correct.
Okay, because um, that's the purpose of the Peace Corps, that they keep a steady stream of willing people who have enough educational wherewithal that can assist instead of being a deterrent. But it's propagated forward. It continues rolling on.
That's one of the three cornerstones of the Peace Corps, is
Okay.
to bring their culture back to us, and then equally, show our American culture to them. But like the third branch is to, take what you've learned and share it with the world, and Americans in particular. So,
Well, because often enough, my friends and I will be talking and we'll be complaining about something, and I say, yeah, that's kind of a first world problem. If you were to say that to somebody in a country that, much like you're describing, oh, I went there and they had green carpet. Could you imagine such a thing? They'd be like,
yeah.
yeah, okay, that's not even on our radar concerns today. We'd like to go out and see if we have enough food. So anyway, that was stint number one. Now, how many times did you join the Peace
So
Corps?
then I came back to the United States and I taught French, and I also served as a library media specialist for a couple of years. And then I decided to go back and was accepted into a teacher training college in Rwanda. So, the eastern part of Africa. And right, so I was only there a couple of months before we were evacuated. But I did teach English and French in this teacher training college.
Well, and you skated over it. You came back, you taught French, and then you did the library technology thing because again, you had to go back to school and you had to learn some more things so that you could apply for that job. And so again, you tend to skip over that, but that's part of the curious nature of who you are. You saw something, you thought, oh, I can do that. You learned it, and then you were able to then help the students who were in your line of sight to do those things and to gain that knowledge and skill set.
Right. I always wanted to be a teacher. So you're right. I do go to pursue for further studies. I have a couple of master's degrees, and I was even going for a third when I had to change locations. But right, so
Well, the first one was that the one in international studies with
correct.
an undercurrent of French. What's the second one in?
Library media and instructional
Okay,
technology.
so because I knew that just wasn't a. I think I'd like to be the librarian, and they say, oh, sure, you fit the bill. You're this tall, and because they do they do require a degree nowadays, which with so few library posts available, they had to make it worthwhile for somebody who's applying. So, what was the best thing about that job that you learned?
Um, I think it's so important, even today, to be able to filter through all the information that's available to us and really take what's the most important. Yeah, and to decipher what's true and what's not true. That was really part of the perspective of what I taught, plus just the love of reading. So those were the two things that really stand out in that. I will tell you that library media is going through so many struggles these days, and library media specialists, in fact, are losing their positions because of this. So, but I still think the love of reading, the the knowledge of what information is true and what information we need is still very, very strong in today's world.
I agree, and again, I read a lot, and so I'm hooked into a couple libraries, and my stepdaughter, she she's a professor at a university, and that's what she does. She goes through the Library of Congress, and she's always talking about first sources,
Right.
not those. And a lot of people don't recognize that that's really, if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know how to weight it with content and value and trustworthiness. And so that's super important. And I do feel for all the librarians these days because things have changed so rapidly that, anyway, their field is going to be in flux, I think, for a little bit longer. Okay, so then so your time in Rwanda, and you said that you were evacuated out. What precipitated that?
COVID. We didn't have any cases of COVID-19 in Rwanda at the time, but Peace Corps requires an airport to be available for departures, and the airports were closing.
Okay,
So they
okay.
evacuated us back. Now they did want me to come back to Rwanda, but it was a couple of years later. So
And by then, I'm sure, because we all have the cycle of life and things, there's a season for everything, and it sounds like that season had closed.
we,
And then you came back. Now, so when you're over there, you're teaching English and French.
mhm.
Now, who are you teaching this to?
So it's a teacher training college, and the kids are really ages 18 through 22, and even a little bit older. But these young students who are such disciplined, lovely students, then will go out into the elementary and secondary schools and teach. So
Okay,
my students
okay,
were teachers.
okay. So that again, I've heard many, many times that there's no seminaries over in those other countries. So they come here, they learn, and then they go back, and then they don't keep that information. They teach it so that they're multipliers of that truth. And so that's what you were there for them. You were multipliers of the English and French language. Okay, so then you're back home from your second stint, and what happens next?
So I'm teaching in some schools here, French, and it turns out that the Peace Corps had its second domestic service ever, and that was giving COVID vaccines to people out in communities that may not have access to healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked with FEMA. So I was accepted into this program, and we worked with FEMA, and we went out into communities. Only about 5 or 6 states invited us, but we would go out into rural communities, set up tents, and invite people to come for free COVID shots.
Okay, but when you say that this is the second only domestic time that the Peace Corps, so basically their thing is you get them from here, but you ship them abroad. But this is the second time that they've kept them here to do that kind of work within our borders.
Correct. The first one was Katrina relief in Louisiana.
Oh, okay, okay, I didn't know that. Good to know.
Yeah.
And so, how long were you at that task
Only
for?
a couple of months. It was a short stint. It was over the
Mm-hmm.
summer.
Mm-hmm. So, how many people did you see pass through the tent?
It depended on the community, right? If the community were a little bit large, or we were in a larger city, we had quite a few more, because we
Mm-hmm.
try to set up camps someplace where people would pass by regularly and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
near commerce. So
Yeah, because I would think that that'd be hard to get the word out too with all because there was a lot of different varying opinions on that. So I'm sure it was
sure.
hard to set a battle zone and keep it straight and have what you want to be accomplished and all that.
Of course, once we set up the big white tents, people were curious.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Nothing will draw a crowd. They're, hey, is a circus
Yeah,
come to town?
that's right.
And so they come to see that. Okay, so now you're at the end of your third time with the Peace Corps, and what happens
Well,
next?
I had wanted to return to Rwanda. They invited me to return, and I once again had to go through the whole medical process and realized that I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, and that was going to be a little bit of a break on my going back at this point, because Peace Corps requires us to have a location whereby we can be treated for whatever disease we have. Therefore, they'll not necessarily send us to the same location as we were before. Whatever the case may be, it was kind of like a difficult situation for me to get medically um, approved. So I launched myself into learning more about the yoga. I'd been practicing yoga for 15 years. And so I really launched myself into yoga versus osteoporosis, and I became certified by the authors of the book, Yoga versus Osteoporosis. So I have maybe now 2, 3 certifications, And I teach yoga versus osteoporosis now.
Well,
Bone health yoga.
bone health yoga, because the whole yoga component, and so stepping back a minute, for why the Peace Corps said that they couldn't provide medical care over there for that, what kind of things did they feel you were going to be in need of if you went there and you had an osteoporosis flare, like a break or something?
Yes.
Okay, so if you fell and broke something, they had to look around and see if that was going to be something that they could was treatable.
Right. Um, I don't really know the answer to what they would do in reference to osteoporosis or osteopenia. I don't really know because I never went,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
I just know that there were so many questions on my medical evaluation in regard to that it was becoming difficult to
Okay. Well, because
improve.
yeah, because I would think if they didn't know that you had a bone density, they would never have known that, and you would have just
True.
gone under the radar as as how you looked, and so sometimes medical diagnoses can can upend our world. But in your case, it drove you to do something that you like. Now, you mentioned yoga for bone density or for bone structure.
Uh-huh.
Is there a difference between, I don't want to say regular yoga or original yoga, and this yoga? What is the difference that formulates that certification?
So, for the most part, there are certain poses in yoga that we should not do if we have osteoporosis, in the sense that most often compression fractures, the most pressures fractures that we have are in the anterior part of the spine. And it's a silent disease of sorts because we don't really have pain when we have these small
Mm-hmm.
fractures. We just
Mm-hmm.
find that we're losing height and our shoulders become more bent over.
Mm-hmm. Rounded,
And
yeah.
yeah, right. And so any pose that would round the shoulders or have you fold forward, we refrain from. We shine our hearts, we and then in order to build that beautiful bone, we hold specific poses for about 30 seconds in order for for the chemical reaction to occur that
Okay.
builds bone.
Okay.
That's
It's similar to the muscle memory. You have to stress that, and then you stop stressing it. Then your muscle remembers that, so it goes through a whole chemical cycle with that as well.
it's exactly that.
Okay.
It's engaging your muscles so that it builds bone by stressing those muscles. That's
Okay.
correct. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not much of an exercise person, and in fact, my stepdaughter Jenny is coming on next week, and because she's a yoga enthusiast and she's been doing this for years and years and years, and so we'll talk more about it. But I tried Pilates once, and that was a floor exercise, and I gave myself a phenomenal headache, so I quit doing that.
Oh,
I've never really done yoga, and yeah, I've done the treadmill. I hate that, and I've done the trampoline, which I do really like, but I'm sure that's not as healthy as what yoga would be if I did it from an accomplished teacher that I could learn to strengthen. And the other thing we were talking about is balance. That as you get older, if you haven't built up your core so that you can retain your balance, that's where the falls occur.
absolutely. Right. And so we work on that. We work on poses that improve our balance, our posture, our strong stability, in particular, lengthening the spine, sitting tall. But I always try to teach my classes with a sense of an intention of goodness, an intention of taking care of oneself, and resting. Um, right. So, and I will tell you, I've been doing this now for about 6 months, and I've had students, my yogis, who've come for 6 months, and it's just amazing the difference. They often say to me, I sleep better, I feel so much better. But what I notice is they stand taller and they stand with pride.
And seriously, I have considered this. I have no real excuse except utter laziness on my part. But I would bet that would be true because my bestie's mom, she was always taller than me. And the last time I saw her, she had shrunk to 5'6", and it was just all the compression
Mhm.
and she was a tiny little woman, and I'm sure she had just what you were talking about. And
Right.
so I've seen it. You think everybody talks about you shrink when you get older, and ha ha ha, but that's a real reality,
It is true.
and it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
And so maybe I'll seriously consider yoga because I do need that. I'm a fairly disciplined person, and maybe if I had somebody that would show me what I'm supposed to be doing, because when I tend to teach my own exercises, I tend to do them wrong, and then I make things worse for myself.
Right.
So that's why it's important to have somebody who knows what they're talking about, standing in front of you, giving it, the what for, and
Yeah, I try to. I have a student that I brought to my own home and aligned her in each of the poses. And now I find that when she comes to class, she's really much better aligned. So, and I will tell you, talk about continuing education. I recently have become certified as a peer educator for the American Bone Health Foundation. So I'll be reaching out into the community, teaching more about bone health.
okay, so when you say a peer advisor, so it's other people that are of similar interests where you teach them what you know so that they then can go out and teach more?
Oh, it's really more just an educational thing. I take what the data and the information from the American Bone Health Foundation, and I just relay the information.
Hmm.
So,
So that you can make your case for why and how, what happens if you don't pay attention to this, and why
mm,
you could make yourself better by doing these things, and you have statistics to back up your
I do.
your points. Okay.
Yeah,
And that's good, because nobody likes to hear because I said,
yeah,
as
no,
your groundbreaking, well, I think you'd be better off because I said.
right.
So out of it sounds like you've really invested your heart and your mind into the whole yoga thing. So what do you see for your future now, besides doing the bone health challenge?
Oh, I need to travel more. I haven't been traveling in the last 4 or 5 years, so I need to travel more. So that's certainly on my radar. Continuing this, the bone health. Um,
And where do you see your travels taking you?
I'm interested in Portugal, and I'm also interested in the Far East. So Vietnam, I'd love to go to Vietnam.
It
That,
seems like a very current hot topic, and I have no idea why. So what about it intrigues you?
Vietnam or Portugal?
Vietnam,
Vietnam,
Portugal has its own. Everybody says Spain, Portugal.
right? And
They all
that's
say
very
that.
hot right now in Portugal. I don't know if I'll
Mm-hmm.
even make it, but
Mm-hmm.
I do at one point would love to do the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain, Portugal. Um, so that's one reason, plus the beauty and for all the other reasons that
Mm-hmm.
one would want to go. Vietnam is interesting to me historically. We were there for during the war, but also where the French were. French preceded us in the war in Vietnam. So I really want to kind of
Oh, I didn't know that.
understand for
I didn't
yeah.
understand that at all. Well, okay, and if my son were here, he'd tell you mom's fortes are not history or geography. So
Okay.
don't ask me where those places are. I go, oh yeah, okay. I sort of know, but it's always it's fun to learn those things. So the French were there, then they left, then we came.
Oftentimes, like if you'll run into a Vietnamese person here in the United States, they speak French.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
you are just a wealth of knowledge. See, I learned something. And again, every time I do the blind zone, I learn things that
right,
I never thought possible or didn't even know I need to know until somebody
right.
told them. Now I know it.
Same thing in Rwanda. So many people in Rwanda speak French because, in fact, it was a Belgian colony.
Mm,
So that's what intrigues me, the French language in other
mm-hmm.
parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, so obviously the Peace Corps door is now closed. You probably
Not
won't
necessarily. I don't really
really.
know yet. We'll have to see if I can get my bone density score moving the opposite direction. One never knows. I still have it in the back of we can do a virtual service currently, whereby I could, you know, start a service for 6 months or so online.
But that's still not the same thing. I mean,
No,
it's like trying to do a prayer group online.
right,
You sort of get the people there, but they're not totally invested
right.
because they know that they're still sitting in their house with their equipment and
Plus, you don't eat the, you don't eat the food, local foods, and
well, that's right. You don't have the whole package where you engage with them, they engage with you, and because again, it's the total interaction, the immersion that helps everybody see things differently than they saw before you got there.
right.
The other is just a technological piece that anybody could plug into almost.
Right.
So is there anything else you want to conclude with before we wrap this up? Because this has been fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
again, the fact that you're a lifelong learner and that what you learn you want to teach, and that when you teach it, you know that other people will be teaching it past you. So
I sure hope so. Yeah, that would be, if that were my legacy, what you just said, that would be perfect.
that's not going to be my legacy. Mine's going to be she was nosy. She was always asking questions. She never let people off the hook. But in fact, I met somebody and they said, okay, now you can grill them. I was like, oh, I hope I don't have that effect on people. But is there anything you want to say before we do conclude this?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to do this, and I hope it's made a difference in your life, because you say you're curious and you want to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone who might be watching this.
That's right. And the one thing that I failed to do, and I've never failed to do this, is I always pray before we start that the Holy Spirit would inspire us to say the words that He needed us to say, and that it would fall into the ears that He needed to hear it. And but I had said it, I didn't say it in a real prayerful way. So anyway, that's my faux pas, but I'm sure that what needed to happen happened. So I really do thank you, Mary Beth, for coming on and talking about these things and just showing what curiosity can do and how far it can take you. And you're right about the books. I've told my son since I don't think he had two breaths in his lungs, if you can read, you can do anything.
That's true.
And I say that to my grandson all the time now, too. So anyway, thanks for
Thank
this.
you
It's been
for
super fun.
inviting me. Yeah, I had best.
Anyway, thank you. And this has been a great episode of The Blind Zone. And we'll see you next time. And I hope, fingers crossed, Dr. Richards will be back and we'll be talking about grief part 2. So we'll see you next week on The Blind Zone.